The house never had a crib, only a cold corner in the mud wall where an oval shadow marked the place where something was once expected. Alma scrubbed the porch floor with ash water, as she did every late winter, while chickens scratched at the dust around her cracked boots. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but it already cast that bluish tone on things that time forgot. Her wedding ring, bent and oxidized, hung on an old nail driven into the side of the door, as if not lost, but intentionally set aside. There, on that porch, everything spoke without sound. The wood, the silence, the small gestures of someone who continues living even after having been left behind. The village was small, small enough not to have a train or a doctor or a Sunday mass if the sky threatened rain. Small enough for every absence to become a rumor, and every rumor to become certainty. Alma knew this. She knew they didn't curse her, they didn't hit her, didn't spit, didn't point. It was worse. They simply stopped seeing her, and when they did see her, it was through the mouth of another woman. Poor thing, they would say with pursed lips, or worse. She wasn't lucky, was she? As if fertility were a fair currency to measure the value of a soul. As if the lack of a full womb erased the entire presence of a life. She had been a wife, for a short, almost lyrical time, the kind of time that's only real when remembered too late, and her husband, Jacob, had a beautiful silence in his gaze, the kind that promises solid ground. He believed that hands say more than words, and with those hands he carved, months before he left, a light, wooden crib. It was a gesture of hope, of blind faith in what didn't yet exist, but the crib never held a cry, never warmed a cloth, never rocked a night, and like every object empty for too long, it became something else. It now stands beside the stove, filled with split firewood. It only cries when the fire crackles, as if it still held within it a child who never arrived. In the village, the pastor's wife spoke louder when Alma passed. The sound of her skirt on the chapel pew seemed harsher when Alma entered. The other women, with children clinging to their hips, held their children a little tighter, as if being sterile were contagious, as if Alma's womb had the power to dry up others' promises. But Alma didn't defend herself. She didn't explain herself. She didn't fight with destiny. She simply woke up, swept, cooked, sewed. She believed there was a type of prayer made with feet on the ground and a broken heart, and that this prayer had more strength than any pulpit sermon. And even without children, she had rituals. She made porridge on Sundays, picked chamomile when the wind changed, kept loose buttons from clothes no one else wore, sang in her mind when the pain tightened, because she discovered that the voice inside us is the only one no one can take away. Sometimes at night, she looked at the crib with firewood and wondered if it was still possible that there, in that home that was never a home for a crib, something new could be born, not a child, but perhaps a meaning, a gesture, a name. Deep down, she no longer asked herself if she could still be a mother. She asked in silence if she could still be a shelter, because some women don't give birth with their bodies, but warm with their souls. And there are children, old people, strangers, who only need that, a quiet soul that doesn't give up on staying, even when the whole world leaves. There, in that forgotten corner of the map, Alma had no children, but there was something in the way she looked at the fire, how she put away the pots, how she sighed on the porch, that seemed to say, if someone chooses me, I'll stay. If someone calls me, I'll listen. If someone gets hurt, I'll take care of them. And perhaps that was the beginning of something, the beginning of a home, even if it was yet to come, even if it came wounded, in silence, or nameless. He appeared at the end of a cold afternoon, when the yellowish light made the field look like a memory. He was dirty to the soul, as if the earth had tried to erase him, his face covered in dust, his cheeks marked by bruises that had already lost the color of anger and taken on the tone of shame. He didn't say his name, he didn't say anything. He just appeared near the barn, thin as a shadow, looking at the ground, as if afraid to meet eyes. Alma saw him, but didn't call out. She stood still at the door, holding the water bowl, like someone witnessing a haunting, not of fear, but of something she recognized without understanding. His silence was thick. It wasn't shyness, nor a tantrum. It was the kind of silence learned when words only bring pain. Alma knew, because she had felt the same kind of silence within her own womb. She didn't ask where he came from, nor if he was hungry. She just left the door open and went back inside. When she came out again minutes later, the boy was sitting on the ground next to the log where the cats usually slept. He wasn't looking at her, nor at anything. He just breathed deeply, like someone struggling not to cry. That night, he slept huddled near the fireplace, with a blanket Alma left folded without saying anything. The room was ready, but he didn't go up, and she didn't insist. Some pains need warmth first, not space. At breakfast, he picked a cracked mug among all the other intact ones. He chose it as if it already belonged to him. Alma noticed. She didn't comment. Children choose what they feel they deserve, and sometimes they believe what is broken matches them more than what shines. He didn't speak, but he ate. He looked at the corners. He knew where things were. He never invaded. He never asked. But he stayed. And staying for someone who has been sent away is pure courage. He started sweeping the porch without her asking, gathering the eggs, taking care of the animals with small but careful hands, and each gesture of his was a silent cry. Alma began to understand. That boy was speaking all the time. He spoke with the way he folded a cloth, with the way he looked at the fire, with the choice of the broken mug every morning. She didn't try to ask questions. She just responded with routine, with warm bread, with a folded blanket, with respected silence. And little by little the boy began to breathe differently, no longer like someone hiding, but like someone who wants to stay. One windy afternoon, Alma saw that he put a new nail in the henhouse door. No one asked, but he saw it was needed, and he acted. That's how he said, "I'm here, and I see." His silence continued, but it was no longer absence. It was language, and on his face, when she handed him the soup, there was something almost imperceptible, a nod of trust, not with his hands, nor with his smile, but with the way he held the spoon, with the way he left the door ajar when he slept, like someone beginning to believe no one would throw him out. And that's how Alma, without promising anything, began to be a home, not a mother, not yet, but a dwelling. And for someone who was torn from himself so early, that was already everything. It was late afternoon when she found her, small hands shoved into the chicken's nest, her eyes blazing with despair and contained rage. It wasn't hunger that moved the girl, it was something else, something harsher, more hidden, a shame learned too early. When Alma approached, the girl pulled the eggs to her lap as if they were weapons. Her eyes didn't apologize, they asked for distance. The girl had her mother's face and her father's fists. She was the sheriff's daughter, but she walked with dust-hardened feet and a voice trained to wound. She said, before running, "I thought you couldn't have anything," as if adult words stuck to children's tongues before they even knew what they meant. Alma didn't answer. She just stood there, with the overturned basket at her feet, listening to the silence that remained after the run. It was a cutting silence, the kind that doesn't heal easily. That night she didn't sleep. She stayed mending an old cloth. It wasn't to fix it. It was just to keep her hands busy while her soul chewed on what she felt. In the morning she collected 2 eggs and placed them on the windowsill outside, not as a trap, but as a sign, like someone saying, "There's still abundance here, even when they take from me." The eggs disappeared before noon, and this time, without a mess, without haste, just taken with care. Alma noticed. Weeks passed. The girl appeared again, this time with a cut on her arm and dry eyes. She said nothing. She didn't ask for help. She just stood by the fence as if she'd forgotten the way back. Alma went inside. She returned with a strip of cloth and a bottle of alcohol. She cleaned the cut without asking questions. The girl bit her teeth, but didn't run away. When she finished, Alma placed her hand on her shoulder for a second, firm but not holding. The next day, there was a rope on the porch steps, new but smelling of old dust. The same one Alma used to tie bundles of firewood. The girl must have taken it from the barn. It was a return or an exchange, or perhaps an invisible bond. Alma hung the rope on the nail next to the crib with firewood. She said nothing. She knew that some things are not tied with words, but with silent gestures. Giving a rope is sometimes trusting that someone will use it to hold on, not to run away. After that, the girl came back a few times, always at the limit, never asking, just being. And Alma, patient like someone waiting for rain in a dry field, left the door unlocked. Each presence of the girl was a new thread in that house, made of remnants and tenderness, and with her came another form of motherhood, not the one that teaches, but the one that repairs, the one that holds without binding, the one that embraces without molding. And so, between stolen eggs, healed cuts, and left ropes, Alma found herself mother to a child who never called her by that name, but who already knew where to find warmth when the world hardened. And that was everything. That was more than blood. It was choice, and it was healing. He arrived without announcing, as do those who have already lost everything, mounted on a tired horse with downcast eyes and heavy shoulders, as if each bone carried a memory no one wanted to hear. He didn't ask for lodging. He just stood there in front of Alma's house, sitting on the saddle, watching the smoke rise from the stove as if it were a sign of something he no longer knew how to interpret. He stayed like that for hours, without knocking, without calling, just waiting for time to let him in. He had the look of someone who had known justice from the hard side of the scale. Alma knew him by sight, a man who was once feared, Once respected, once someone. Now he was just a presence. And in his saddlebag, he carried 2 small wooden horses, hand-carved, small, worn. Alma didn't ask, she just noticed. She knew that toys kept by silent men are laments transformed into wood. When night fell, she lit a candle on the windowsill and pushed the door open more gently. The next day he was in the porch chair. He still hadn't spoken, but his eyes were wet with dew, or something deeper. Perhaps it was the smell of smoke, the warmth of the firewood, the sound of the kettle. Because there are pains that are not cured with words, but with smells that remind one of a time that will not return. Alma offered him a bowl of soup. He ate slowly, as if each spoonful weighed more than the last sentence he signed. Then, without saying a single word, he stood up and began to repair the porch steps. The hammer in his hand trembled slightly, but the gesture was firm, and in that hammered silence he was saying what could no longer be said. She didn't ask about his children, and he didn't tell. But that afternoon, while he polished the old handrail, she placed a folded piece of cloth over the arm of the chair where he sat. It was a cloth smelling of lavender and thyme. A simple gesture, but for him it was enough. He stayed. In the following days, he repaired the roof, waxed the table, redid the kitchen bench. Each repair was a kind of silent prayer, each hammer blow a tear that refused to fall. Alma cooked in silence, made the coffee stronger, hung the clothes on the line with slower hands. It wasn't forced hospitality, it was coexistence with space. In that house of woven silence, the judge found a space where he didn't need to be a name or a function, just a man who, even broken, still knew how to build. And Alma, with her wordless listening, offered him a place where grief didn't need to be hidden, where pain could exist without explanation. On the rebuilt porch, the children began to sit near him. First the boy from the barn, then the girl with the rope. The judge never spoke to them, but one afternoon he left one of the wooden horses on the lowest step. He didn't say who it was for, but everyone understood. That's how, without promises, he stayed. And there, in that corner of the world where justice fails and love survives, a man who buried 2 children slowly rediscovered a place where sorrow could rest, even if it was never shed. The fire started as all disasters do, too small to scare, too late to contain. It was a dry night with an east wind and a scent of tension hanging in the air. The orange light danced on the horizon before anyone realized it wasn't sunset, but despair. When the bells rang, when voices began to rise and horses to neigh, Alma was already halfway there, not because someone called her, but because she felt it. Because there are souls that move at the smell of danger, like mothers at the sound of crying. The saloon burned as if trying to return to the earth everything that had once been forgotten there. Men ran with buckets, women screamed for their children, and in the midst of the chaos there were the children, small, scattered, lost, hidden under boards, basements, smoky corridors. Alma went in. She didn't hesitate, her wet handkerchief on her face, her gaze fixed, her step firm. 1, 2, 3. She pulled pieces of innocence from the flames that no one else could see. She didn't call out names. She just recognized the eyes of fear, the same eyes she once had in the face of another loss. Between crackles and flames, she found a boy huddled under the gaming table. He held a burnt paper, half stuck to his fingers. Alma carried him in her arms, and when they were outside, away from the suffocating heat, he whispered, for the first time, not thank you, nor help, just mother. Alma didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were too full, not with tears but with an old silence that at last had found translation. She went back one more time, and what she brought from there wasn't gold, it wasn't whiskey, it wasn't any valuable possession. She came out carrying a piece of burnt paper, the same one the boy was holding. It was a drawing, poorly done, childish, crooked, a house, 4 small figures, and in the center, a woman in a blue dress. The family someone wished for but never had. The family that perhaps unknowingly was already forming there, around Alma. The next morning the town was silent, not the silence of fear, but the other kind, the one that comes after everything has been proven. No one applauded, no one gave speeches, they just nodded their heads, a wordless recognition, a respect that didn't need to be announced. And it was there in that respectful silence that Alma realized she was no longer the woman the town avoided. She was now part of the burnt ground, part of the reconstruction, not for having given birth, but for having carried through the fire what is most human, the courage to care. And when she returned home, the crib in the kitchen no longer held firewood. It held sunshine, a handful of sunflowers picked by small hands, left there without a note, a gesture, a thank you. A silent renaming, because that night Alma stopped being the one who couldn't, and became the one who always was. It started with a remnant, a piece of cloth forgotten in the back of a drawer. Alma found it while looking for buttons to mend the boy's coat. It was old, soft, smelling of thyme. She remembered her mother, her hands sewing by lamplight, and without much thought, she cut a square and kept it, not because she needed it, but because something inside her asked for it. Like someone who unknowingly begins to build a memory. In the following days, more pieces appeared. A small pocket from a child's dress, left on the porch smelling of smoke. A worn handkerchief, forgotten on the back of the judge's chair. A dish towel that the sheriff's daughter would wrap around her hand when she felt small. None of them said anything, none offered, but all left them, as if each one knew deep down that Alma was gathering fragments, not of fabric, but of belonging. She sewed at night, when the silence was denser and the house breathed in peace. The stitches were small, patient, almost timid. There was no hurry. There was ritual. Each basted piece was a story told without voice, and the quilt grew, day by day, with uneven colors, different textures, smells that came from the childhoods of others. But there was harmony. There was warmth. One day, Alma took a white, thin remnant, kept at the bottom of the trunk. It was part of her wedding dress, the hem, more precisely, the one that never touched an altar but knew the ground. She cut a small piece, square, unadorned. She sewed it to the center of the quilt, not to remember what she lost, but to reintegrate what was still hers. Because there are losses that are not erased, they are just sewn into something new. The children watched the quilt form, but didn't ask. They felt it, and they started lying on it on warm afternoons, even when the heat didn't call for shelter. It was there they took naps, told short stories, whispered secrets. The quilt became floor, ceiling, pillow. It became home, and Alma, without saying a single word about what she was doing, realized that what she could never give with her body, she was delivering with her hands, a fabric of affection, a comfort made of leftovers, and each remnant an acceptance, not of what was missing, but of what was. Every night, even on warm ones, she spread the quilt on the living room floor. A simple gesture, a domestic altar, a reminder that there, in that improvised space, something stronger than destiny existed. Choice existed. Union made of small, silent donations existed. Finally, a family existed, not shaped by blood, but by stitching, and by the kind of love that never needed a name to be felt. It had always been there. A simple, worn wooden rocking chair leaning against the front door. It was never used, not because it was fragile, but because it had a place and a purpose that no one dared to violate. It was always clean, facing east, where the sun rose, not towards the road, like someone waiting for a return. Alma passed by it every day. Sometimes she placed a blanket over the back. Sometimes she left dried flowers on the seat, small, almost invisible gestures that said, "Hope also lives here." Gradually, without realizing it, the children stopped knocking on the door. They came right in, took off their shoes on the porch, sat in the kitchen, left objects in corners, a button, a hairpin, a colorful stone, and Alma collected everything with the care of someone who knows that's how roots are built, not with fences, nor with promises, but with the freedom to enter without asking. The judge one morning left a new doorknob on the table. No one spoke about it, but Alma replaced the old one that same afternoon. The girl with the rope began to embroider letters on the dish towel. Only initials, small, but they were there. The boy from the barn, one morning when everyone was busy, fixed the latch on the back door. He did it without warning, without fanfare, like everything in that house. Silent, but transformative. The crib, now with sunflowers, became an altar. It received light from the window, shade from the long afternoons, and a sweet smell that Alma couldn't name. It was as if that corner of the house had finally found its purpose, not the one the world expected, but the one the soul needed. It was on a calm, windy afternoon that she found it, beneath the lowest beam of the porch, near the ground, carved with a fine knife and a small hand, Ma. Not highlighted, not to be read, but to exist, like someone who inscribes, not for the world but for the heart. Alma ran her fingers over the word. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and took a deep breath, like someone who finally understands what has always been. And the chair, it was still there, untouched, but it no longer seemed lonely. It was a symbol of waiting that became presence, of absence that became home. It was never made for sitting. It was made to remember that even what didn't come, even what was missing, can blossom in another time, in another form. And there on the porch, bathed in low light, Alma was no longer the woman who had no children. She was the woman chosen by those who had already lost everything, and who in silence knew where to find shelter, because sometimes a barren land is needed for what no seed ever dared to plant to grow.